All right, everyone. It's been a little while since I have done one of these green white checker videos. Part of that is due to the fact that I've just been so busy with covering high school and college baseball over the last few months that I really honestly haven't even had a whole lot of time to sit back and really take in much of the races. The last one I actually watched start to finish was the Richmond race a few months ago, that wild one that Denny Hamlin jumped the restart on there at the end to seal the deal on that one. But yeah, I'm not going to dig into that because A, that was a while ago, and B, the piece has pretty well already been spoken on that. But just got back from North Wilkesboro, my first in-person race this season since February, back when I went to Atlanta for the Xfinity and Truck Series races. And for the second year in a row, NASCAR has a very interesting job ahead of them with this North Wilkesboro All Star race. I mean, the big storyline coming into the weekend obviously was the tires. You know, we talked about the race last year and how Kyle Larson dominated it start to finish. He really swept and dominated the entire weekend start to finish. Seemed like he was the only driver that could figure anything out about North Wilkesboro. Granted, a lot of the drivers going in last year had never run at North Wilkesboro before. North Wilkesboro, 40-plus-year-old asphalt and a surface that didn't have a whole lot of grip on it, and that the drivers are going to have to be searching for grip on. And that's kind of part of the character of North Wilkesboro with that old asphalt, even dating back to its glory days back in the 90s. Yeah, it was always characterized by long green flag runs. It was always characterized by drivers that were just trying to find some sort of edge that may or may not ever come. And it was not at all uncommon to see one driver almost lead the entire race. So, yeah, North Wilkesboro's keeping true to character in that through the first two experiments they've had. But this year, one of the storylines coming in, it was repaved, and it was repaved just back in November of this past year, so just a few months ago. And the Speedway went with the same type of asphalt mixture that they used to repave Atlanta, which you see how that's paid off so far. Drivers don't like it, but Atlanta has produced some of the best racing in the circuit so far. Yeah, you had the crazy three wide finish there between Kyle Busch and Ryan Blaney and Daniel Suarez back in February. And I hate I missed seeing that in person. I had to leave the day before because I had a broadcast that I had to run the board for at the radio station I work for. But uh, Atlanta, obviously, just like the rest of the mile and a half tracks with this next gen car, it's been figured out. They've got those down to a science. It's been the short track package and everything that hasn't been figured out. And yeah, for a sport that was kind of built on short track racing, and for short track racing to be as popular as it is with the fans, it's something that NASCAR has obviously needed to figure out, and they're still putting a concerted effort into trying to figure out. So they went ahead and repaved North Wilkesboro with the hopes that would help make it faster. They succeeded because that track was indeed faster. They used that same race ready asphalt mixture they used for Atlanta in order to help the track rubberize a lot more quickly. And it worked. That's exactly what happened this weekend. But also, NASCAR, in an effort to try to fix the short track package, made a huge stride this weekend in the fact that they introduced what they call the option tire. And yeah, if you've watched the race, you realize that they had the traditional Goodyear racing radials that were the harder tire compound that had the yellow lettering on them. And then they had the softer tire compound that's very similar to the compound used at Bristol, albeit one that Goodyear apparently kind of made by mistake back at the spring Bristol race. You saw how that tire basically was disintegrating and shredding to pieces, leaving just piles of tire rubber at the top of the track. And you saw how, because of the tire wear and the drop off that those created, it made that race the most entertaining spring Bristol race in the last 20 years, it feels like. And yeah, so they went with the softer tire compound. It's kind of a similar idea to what Formula One uses. Formula One has the hard tires and the softer tires. It's kind of a similar concept here. They went with the softer tire compound, and it's also one that's kind of similar to what they use in the wet weather tires that they use in NASCAR. So they went with this different tire compound, and the hope was that it was going to be, because it was softer, and because this track was designed to be able to lay down rubber a lot faster, that was going to help improve the product. And honestly, it did. I mean, you look at the practice on Thursday night. Lap times, they were running about 18-second lap times, just a little bit faster than what they were a year ago. They were also in qualifying running about the same. The Truck Series race, they didn't use the softer tires, but with the repave, the Truck Series trucks are running a lot faster. And in the All Star Open, you saw how chaotic that race ended up being. It was actually three wide and two wide racing throughout the pack for most of the race, unlike we had ever seen at North Wilkesboro these last 2 years. And so, yeah, the All Star Open was definitely a smashing success. But when it came down to it in the main event, it kind of worked out the opposite way than was expected. The the tires didn't end up the thing was that the tire strategy was thought that was going to be what was going to determine this race. When were you going to put on the softer tires? When were you going to stick with the hard compound? What was going to be the strategy there, and what was going to give you the edge when you needed it? And at the end of the day, no matter which tire compound you used, you were able to match lap times with the other guys around you, no matter what they were using. I think of one specific example. About midway through the second segment, there it was everybody was kind of getting strung out as the tires had dropped off a little bit, and yeah, Bubba Wallace was the last car on the lead lap. By all means, he should have gone a lap down. Joey Logano though just got stuck behind him, and it was that way for probably about 30 laps up until the caution came out for the halfway point at lap 100. And so for 30 laps, even with Joey Logano right on his tail, he was able to hold him off. And the crazy thing is, even being held up in traffic, Chris Buescher, running back in second at the time, wasn't able to gain any ground on Joey Logano. So they were all matching lap times, and it just seemed like the tire just didn't end up making a big difference in the end. And that's not a knock on this. It's not to say that it was a failure, because this is the first time they've tried it, and in all fairness, this is also the first time they've tried it in a night race where the track was already rubberized before. So this is kind of conditions that they haven't seen with it yet. So the verdict is still out. No, Joey Logano said that it was suggested whether or not maybe they want to see if they could use this tire at, say, New Hampshire here in a couple of weeks. And Logano was like, I can't answer that. I don't even know if Goodyear can answer that. It's going to take maybe running a tire test or something there. And I think that we're going to see this compound used again. NASCAR is going to continue to experiment with it because, believe it or not, even though Joey Logano led all but one lap in the All-Star race, and it wasn't that to a lot of people, because of that, they're saying it wasn't a great race. It may have even been worse than last year. I disagree. I actually think that this race was probably, it was 10 times more entertaining than last year. Last year, Kyle Larson dominated it start to finish, and everybody was just kind of running around the bottom, follow the leader. There was no attempts to try to make a whole lot of passes. There was not a whole lot of moves, and everybody was just kind of playing it like they were scared a little bit. You expected that this year, because everybody had more experience, that they would naturally be a lot better. But then you add in the repave, you add in the new tires and everything, and it made for a better product this time. Just like in the Open, you saw guys racing 2-3 wide throughout the pack for most of the race. And then you saw the incident, which we'll get to that in a second, there on the first lap of the race of someone trying to go 3 wide. You know what, let's go ahead and dive into that real quick. I'll get back to talking about why I thought the race is better. For some people, this whole thing may have salvaged the race, but Ricky Stenhouse Jr. and Kyle Busch made contact with one another. On the very first or the very second lap of the race, coming off of turn 2, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. decides to shoot a gap that he saw right there to try to take it 3 wide and try to gain some track position. And some would say, and even in my initial thoughts, I thought that maybe that was a little bit of a ridiculous move because A, it was only the second lap, and B, at North Wilkesboro, turns 1 and 2 are really tight, and you have to slow down a lot going through that part of the track right there. There's really not enough room to try to take it 3 wide, and that was a really aggressive move. And I just thought that it was a really early in the race for that kind of an aggressive move, and because he did that, because it was so narrow coming off of 2, it did run Kyle Busch into the wall. Kyle Busch bounced off the wall, came back down into Stenhouse, and honestly, from Kyle Busch's words on it, Stenhouse is right about this. Kyle Busch did it intentionally. He hooked him and put him in the wall on purpose. As Kyle Busch said that he was tired of getting run over. But at the end of the day, it was a... I don't want to say that either driver was necessarily in the wrong here. The only qualm I have about this is that it was super early in the race to be that aggressive. I understand where Stenhouse is coming from because passing is not easy to do at North Wilkesboro, and this was definitely a track position kind of race. But still, the second lap of an exhibition race, that the only thing you've really got on the line is $1 million. And granted, $1 million is a lot of money. I'd want that too, especially if you're Ricky Stenhouse and you don't really get a chance to win a whole lot. I get it. But it's the second lap, and I just don't think that the timing was necessarily wise, especially in that part of the track, to go for a move quite that aggressive that early on. And if you're Kyle Busch, the retaliation, if it was anywhere but a short track, he'd probably have been suspended for it because he kind of hooked him right into the wall. Yeah, something similar to what Chase Elliott did to Denny Hamlin at Charlotte in the 600 last year. Something similar to what Bubba Wallace did a few years ago at Las Vegas. But the thing is, they got suspended for those actions because it was on, as Bob Pockers put it, on a much more dangerous type of move on a faster track. You got to think about it. It happened right in the middle of the front straightaway on a track where you're going 180 miles an hour versus North Wilkesboro, where you're coming off turn two going 90 miles an hour at the fastest. And so, at the end of the day, it was just hard racing between these two. And I don't know that either driver was necessarily in the wrong, other than the fact that it was just too early in the race for that kind of a move, especially given what type of race it was. But moving on back, going on back to that, the metric for success for the All Star race, if you're a fan, is Jordan Bianchi from The Athletic always puts out a poll after every race of, was this a good race? And a lot of times people's responses are based on whether or not there was a lot of passing for the lead, whether or not there was a lot of battles throughout the field, whether or not there were a lot of cautions. It's all subjective stuff. And everybody's entitled to their opinions about it. But if your metric for success for the All Star race for this year in particular was for it to be better than it was last year, meaning that either there's a different somebody that different leaders, or there was more passing and the cars are faster. If that's your metric, then this was a slam dunk. Yes, Joey Logano led all but one lap of the race, and if your metric is for passing for the lead, okay, yeah, you're probably disappointed. Unless you're a big Joey Logano fan, just like last year. Unless you're a big Kyle Larson fan, you were probably a little bit disappointed in the result of the weekend as a whole. But if your metric is for racing throughout the pack, a lot of attempts at passing, even if there wasn't a whole lot of passing to be done, especially late down the stretch, which again is just typical of North Wilkesboro, then it was a success. And Joey Logano said as much. The fact of the matter is that there were 3 viable lanes on a racetrack that was just paved back in November. 3 lanes, even if they're not passing, they're still trying to pass and they're still trying to make moves. Last year, you didn't even see them trying to. And there was just no grip to be found or anything. And so at the end of the day, if the metric of success is to be better than last year, it was. And so I think this was actually a good race. It doesn't have to have a lot of cautions to be a good race. It doesn't have to have a whole lot of passes for the lead to be a good race. A good race is a good race. You got more than just a leader out there racing. You got a lot of guys racing for position throughout the field, whether or not it means anything. So, it's to me, the All Star race was a smashing success, and it was a smashing success for more than just what went on the track. For the second straight year, North Wilkesboro Speedway being able to pull off having the All Star race at all was nothing short of an absolute miracle. You think about last year, the miracle was the fact that they were able to get the track ready in just 8 months to be able to host it. This year, the miracle was the fact that they were able to get anything done at all, because in a lot of tracks and other situations that they were put into this weekend would have had to cancel everything because there's no way they would have been able to get everything together. Now, if you weren't there or you missed it, okay, I don't know how you would have, but Saturday was an absolute weather disaster. Like, you got 81 laps into the truck race, and the lightning strike happened nearby. You had the storm cloud that was hovering over the track, but just seems like it didn't want to do anything. And then when it did finally decide to do something, there was no warning. It just started pouring right off the rip, and it didn't stop. It just kept on raining for a while. And in the span of less than 2 hours, it dumped 5 inches of rain around the entire area around North Wilkesboro Speedway. It would rain so hard that, North Wilkesboro has a downhill front stretch, so as the rainwater was pooling up, it was flowing down towards the storm drains in turn 1, taking with it a lot of lug nuts and debris and trash. It ended up clogging up the storm drain, which led to the infield flooding. I'm sure you saw the photos of the tires floating around, and guys like Christian Eckes like diving and trying to trudge through the water there. But aside from the flooding inside the track, there was a lot of flooding outside. And if you know North Wilkesboro Speedway, their parking lots are basically all just grass that's on sloping hills. And, the area around North Wilkesboro being out in the middle of nowhere, there's a lot of power lines that are not buried or anything like you'd see around other tracks maybe. And so Yeah, there were a lot of trees and down power lines along Speedway Road right outside the track. It knocked out the power, and they didn't get it back on until about 2 o'clock in the morning that night. So you got all these guys that work for Speedway Motorsports trying to figure out what they can do to get ready for the next day with no power, no internet, no phone service, no nothing. They're working in the dark. And add into that, when they go out to inspect the grounds, once it finally does stop raining, they discovered that 40% of the Speedway's parking lots, again, all grass, mostly on sloping hills with gravel roadways in between to get to where you're going, 40% of the Speedway's available parking was no longer safe to use. And a lot of that unsafe parking area was handicap parking and prepaid parking. So there's one challenge right there. They had to go and find another place for these people that had paid for parking already to go. And they had to find a place for handicapped people to be shuttled from to get to the track. On top of that, they had to find a way for the parking lot that was still usable to make it to where it was completely safe to navigate through. Because I'll tell you, I had to learn how to drive like I'm driving on a dirt track to get out of there on Saturday night, because the media parking lot is no exception. It was on a hill. And so you had to go downhill to get out because it was the only way. And it was a slip and slide, just getting stuck left and right. I don't know how I managed to get out of there. It was nothing short of a miracle, just like this whole weekend. But yeah, they had to go in and bring in 850 tons of gravel in order to be able to make the driveways safe to drive through. That required getting with the local rock quarry in the middle of the night, who also probably didn't have power, by the way, and getting them to prepare all of that gravel and get it delivered to the Speedway. On top of that, they needed equipment in order to help spread all that gravel. They needed volunteers to help spread it out. They needed someone, again, to help provide parking. And they managed to get all of this stuff without a hitch. Like, literally, it went off absolutely flawlessly. And so it was nothing short of a miracle that North Wilkesboro was able to host an event at all. Yeah, a lot of credit to, I guess, to Speedway Motorsports, Marcus Smith's team there. They did a great job doing their due diligence to try to get all this together. But under these extenuating circumstances, it just seems like it's someone up above wants North Wilkesboro Speedway to stay open. Like because this is 2 straight years now where it's been a miracle they pulled this event off. And so, tip of the cap to North Wilkesboro Speedway and the staff and everybody from Speedway Motorsports for helping to make this happen. Ultimately, the weekend was a smashing success in 2 ways. The fact that something did happen, and the fact that the race was actually not as bad as a lot of people would lead on. And so I think that bodes well for North Wilkesboro's future. I think the track is around to stay. And I think that it's going to get better as that asphalt continues to age. And even though you tend to be impatient as a fan, I think in the next couple of years, 2, 3, 4 years down the road, eventually they'll finally have the kinks worked out with the next gen car. And then the racing product's going to be fantastic. We won't be complaining about anything. And so at the end of the day, tip of the cap, North Wilkesboro, the All-Star race was a fantastic event and a smashing success. All right, that's going to do it for this edition of Green White Checker. I'll be at Charlotte for the Coca-Cola 600 next week, so you'll hear from me again then.